Canavan swearing. All right, I want to get the bells in though. It's good.
Okay.
All right,
You better go quick then.
Okay. All right, based podcast. Two of the most based people in the building. Senators, their bells have stopped. Senators Gerard Rennick and Matt Canavan. Thank you. This is based on the road, Canberra. You're in my Canberra office with the flag behind you. And thanks for coming in after the bells have been ringing all morning. We tried to do this an hour ago. Having said all of that, we want to talk about last week's hearing into, Matt, your COVID-19 vaccine discrimination bill. Starting off, tell everyone about the bill and what it's trying to do, and we'll get to that.
Look, in simple terms, Alex, this bill would end vaccine mandates, at least for any company covered by federal law, by Commonwealth law. And fortunately, most of those mandates have gone. They've proven to be a complete disaster. So many people were hurt across the country by the imposition of mandates, and it's something I know all of us have tried to take up the cause of over the past couple of years. So, look, I introduced a bill. Actually, this bill was introduced late last year to get rid of all the remaining mandates. I still meet people from time to time that are captured by this. We must remember there are still people suffering from them. And this bill went to a committee for an inquiry. We've already had hearings, but it just took us a while to get Pfizer and Moderna. For some reason, they were a bit reluctant to turn up. So finally, and thank you to the other members of the committee, other senators, even senators that don't agree with us, they did use the Senate's powers to make Pfizer and Moderna turn up finally. And so we got our hearing last week.
Yeah. And so this is a bill that both of us have also co-signed. And so just for people who aren't aware, the process goes before the Senate, and then we got it referred off to this, thanks to your good work and your good work, off to this hearing, which was pretty powerful because these people turned up and
they had to turn up.
Yeah,
they wouldn't have. They weren't going to come voluntarily. They ultimately came voluntarily after a bit of pressure. But if we didn't have, I'm convinced, if we didn't have the power to force them to come, Pfizer and Moderna wouldn't have turned up.
That's right. And they didn't.
It just shows their lack of accountability.
They turned up on screen.
They turned up on screen.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And some pretty good stuff came out of it. Gerard, I think, landed one of the big questions of the day, which was getting them to run through this, for the Pfizer guys, to get them to run through this, the mechanism of why their, not our bills, why their product causes myocarditis, which they said they did. So take us through that. You asked the question and you didn't get an answer, which was the theme of the day.
Well, okay, so we didn't get an answer out of Pfizer and Moderna, but then when I put the question again to the TGA, they admitted that myocarditis was an autoimmune response to the heart.
Yep.
So that would then indicate that, it's plausible that the vaccine causes autoimmune responses against all body organs, because as we know from the TGA Pfizer non-clinical report, page 45, that the vaccine lipids, when they tested in animals, went into all body organs. So that then raises the issue of, well, why have these guys constantly repeated the mantra, it's safe and effective, without qualifying the risks? And the fact that they couldn't answer that question or didn't want to would indicate that they're either being evasive or they don't understand their own product. And obviously, if they didn't understand their own product, they were also being evasive when they didn't qualify any risks around the vaccine.
Yeah, and I think you went on, or earlier on, Matt, you probed the issue from the get-go about transmission, because that's really that's sort of the critical part of it.
Well, it's at least Gerard's done fantastic work exposing the side effects, the terrible side effects that have affected people, and taking up their cause too. I've got to give him credit for that. But I suppose you're right that the crux of the issue with this bill was does even these products stop transmission or reduce it? If there's no effect on the transmission of COVID-19 from the vaccine, why would you mandate it? Why would you force other people, third parties, to get it? It should then, of course, just be a personal decision. And, the major issue I've got with Pfizer here is they put out statements early in their vaccine rollout that their product did reduce or stop transmission. In fact, one tweet once claimed that it was 100% effective against you getting coronavirus. And then they never qualified that subsequent to that. They never went back and told us all, look, actually the evidence has come in and it's not 100% effective, or it's not very effective at stopping the spread. We know that now, of course. Everyone knows that. We can see that in the world, that taking the vaccine doesn't stop you getting COVID. But they've never actually come up front with that. And I raised the question, I raised it today in the debate we had, is Pfizer here guilty of misleading and deceptive conduct? I mean, any other corporate business in this country selling a product and made these outlandish claims about their product, which were then proven to be false, that's really good, strong grounds for a misleading, deceptive conduct case. And the fact that there's not more talk of that, it calls into question whether these indemnities that they've got, are they covered? Their statements covered, not just their products covered, are their statements that they make covered by the indemnity as well that the Australian government's given them? Because I tell you what, they could not convince us how they would not be charged or should not be charged with misleading, deceptive conduct given their statements.
And you made the point, I think, that the CEO Anthony Baller back in December of 2020 said that he wasn't certain if vaccinated people could catch or spread the virus, but they continue
at the time. So there's a key. I suppose there's a timeline here, right? When they released the vaccine, it is very clear that they've never tested whether it could be stopped. Transmission could be stopped. Yep. You might recall the European Parliament. They said they had to work at the speed of science, and they didn't do that testing. So they've already admitted that. And I've had conversations with Pfizer behind the scenes, and they've admitted they couldn't test for transmission in a laboratory environment or in a placebo sort of blind test. They did, though, after it was rolled out, conduct a number of studies or participated in studies which they claimed reduced transmission in the real world. So particularly in Israel, they did a study in Israel early on where they claimed that this shows, the real world data shows that our vaccine is working to stop the spread. Now, as I say, that's proven to be all false. All those claims have proven to be false as we got more and more data. But they only seem to report the good news, Pfizer. They report the good news when they were lucky enough to have some. They won't tell us things that might be defective or not up to scratch with their product. Yet they stood back, and were happy for governments to mandate their product all around the world and make millions and billions of dollars from it. They're still trying. I think that's why they're trying to also maintain this ridiculous line, which you might go to, that no one was forced to take their product. Apparently, they claim that multiple times.
Because you make the point, I think, on the day that for the CEO to say it had a massive impact on the the regulators around the world, of course, because they're hearing it straight from the horse's mouth. And I think Gerard took it up as well with them. I think they took him to task on the statement that 100% the Pfizer vaccine was 100% effective in preventing COVID-19 cases, which was something that the CEO repeated. He tweeted it on the 2nd of April 2021. And I think you took it up to them as to why that was implausible or improbable. What was the response?
Well, so, the real world evidence in Australia was within 10 months of opening up international borders, 10 million people had recorded COVID cases in Australia. Big brother out of control. So at least 10 million people caught COVID. So that meant it didn't stop infection. It didn't either, A, it didn't stop transmission, and B, it didn't stop infection. Now that matters because when the product assessment report was released, that was the purpose of the vaccine, was to stop infection.
And the mandates.
Well, that was transmission and infection.
That's a good point, Gerard.
So there's sort of two steps in that. And they do go hand in hand. So and of course they would then reply. So I'll just finish this on that. But it reduces illness and death. Well, it turns out that if you actually look at Pfizer's 6-month study, that adverse events, and there's different categories of adverse events. One was 300% higher in the inoculation group. One was 75% higher, and one was 10% higher. As well as that, deaths were also higher in the inoculation group. So in their own trial, it never showed that it reduced sickness or death. It actually showed the opposite. Yeah. And then we can match that with the real world data where we had a jump in deaths in 2021 in Australia of, 10,000 people or 3 standard deviations from the mean, which is very large. So, even their argument that the vaccine reduces serious illness and death, I actually still dispute that as well.
Yeah.
Well, I think this raises the other point that perhaps the greatest error, injustice, tragedy that has occurred through all of this is the mass or attempt to mass vaccinate children.
Right.
And when you go back and have a look at the approval documents for the vaccine for children, which were separately evaluated, the regulators admit, or at least to imply, you sort of can draw it out of their conclusions, that there actually isn't really a net benefit for a child taking the vaccine, even on their own data, on their own merits. Because the risk of coronavirus was so low to children, the actual benefit of taking the vaccine just wasn't there to create a net benefit. The way they got around that to approve the vaccine for young children was to say and rely on the fact that the vaccine stopped transmission or reduced transmission. Yeah. And we were, the colloquial way this was told us, we had to take it to protect your grandma. Yeah. That's what we were told. And so many parents, I'm sure, were probably a little bit wary about getting their kids vaccinated, thinking, look, there's not a lot of risk, why would I do that?
Yeah.
But then they were sort of told that, hey, if you want to protect your grandma, you want to protect your older relatives, your friends, you have to have your kids vaccinated. And so we put children at risk. There was a risk, even on their own data, there was a risk to them from the vaccine. We put them at risk to protect older people in this country on a completely incorrect assumption.
And at a time, if you remember, the timing in Australia was just before Christmas as well. So people were all being forced with this. Well, Grandma, and we all know people and have had experience with people that said, I'm not coming to Christmas if this and the other. So that borderline standover was real. I think people still feeling the sociological, societal effects of that today. The other thing I think Gerard brought up was the TGA's non-clinical report listing all the safety studies in animals, which I thought was really, really impressive. I mean, none of this stuff, by the way, happens if people like this don't get these matters before a Senate inquiry. So very rarely has it happened around the world. So this is, you won't hear about it in the Australian press, but you can hear about it on other parts of the media all over. But I thought that stuff about safety studies in animals and there are assurances that no corners were cut was pretty interesting. But do you want to explain that?
Look, corners were cut everywhere. Yeah. I mean, no immunological testing, no genotoxicity testing, no carcinogenic testing, no longitudinal testing, no testing on compromised patients, vulnerable patients with lots of comorbidities. In the actual trials, only 4% of the population were older than 75% of the trial population, despite the fact that they were most at risk. But the other thing was, there was no distribution and degradation studies done on the spike protein. Yeah. So when you look at the lipid biodistribution throughout the body, they used a benign enzyme called luciferase. They didn't dare use the actual spike protein itself. And that's the difference between, say, crossing a border as a fruit truck and crossing the border with a bunch of, Tomahawk missiles on the back. It's the spike protein in itself. So they never tested that, which was just, that was the ingredient that they were delivering. That was the active ingredient. Likewise, 4 of the lipids, so there are 4 lipids that we use to encase the spike protein, the mRNA, of that, 2 of the lipids, ALC-315 and -159, 2 of the 4 were never even tested. So they were novel lipids that were never tested because these particular lipids were designed to increase transfection. And what that means is this is the first drug that's ever gone inside a human cell. Now, a normal vaccine will create an immune response to the foreign body that the vaccine, which is in itself a foreign antigen. So, immune response kills foreign antigen in your shoulder. This one generates a T cell response, killer T cell response against your otherwise healthy cells that were infected by the vaccine. And these lipids were designed to infect any cell. Now, the normal virus has an ACE receptor, but not all organs have ACE receptors, or some organs have more ACE receptors. So the virus can only attack certain cells. This particular vaccine can attack all cells, including, and we know this from the biodistribution study, the spleen, as well as your bone marrow. Yeah. So that means the bone marrow produces your white blood cells. So that means that these lipids can go inside your white blood cells, that create the very things that are designed to protect you, and destroy your own white blood cells. And there's been a report on that this week I won't go into. So none of this stuff was tested, and it is just obscene. They actually redacted this stuff initially, and it's only thanks to the work of a constituent in Melbourne that pushed to get this redaction lifted. But when they lifted this redaction in the Pfizer non-clinical report, it admitted to transfection, i.e. going into every cell, and admitted to codon optimization, where they got this mRNA to produce more of the spike protein, not less. Now, yet again, that's against the normal gist of a vaccine, which is attenuated, i.e. it's a weakened strain. This actually increases the potency or toxicity of the actual spike protein or vaccine compared to the virus. So it just goes against all the logic. If you look at it from a top-down perspective in the pathway was a much higher risk of the vaccine than the actual virus, which, mind you, and coming back to transmission, you cannot stop a virus coming in through your mucosal system, which is controlled by hemoglobin A, by sticking something in here and getting an hemoglobin G response, right? And they knew this very early on. Ian Fraser, one of Australia's more recognised immunologists or virologists, said this way back in April 2020 on the ABC, that it's very difficult to get a vaccine for an upper respiratory tract infection, which is effectively on the outside of your body. Yet, the week after or 2 weeks after Joe Biden, basically approved 3 vaccines for a upper respiratory tract infection. within a number of weeks of him being elected president. I mean, if that wasn't a red flag, I mean, they couldn't find a vaccine in 40 years, and suddenly the week after he's elected, they found 3. So another red flag that was just,
They were everywhere, and it didn't seem to matter because people were just getting coerced and forced into it, which of course you raised. I think it was raised during your cross-examination, and one of the presenters from Pfizer suggested that nobody was forced.
No, he was forced. And not only that, when that was first said, Alex, like I was a bit shocked that they would make such a bold claim that no one was forced.
What did he actually
to get
say?
their vaccine? I don't
those
have
bills are not ours. Just for people that are listening, we are. That happens a lot in here. It's
divisions.
part of the reason why everyone's lost it.
He I'm not even sure I directly asked him about the vaccine being mandated, but he made a statement that no one was forced to get the vaccine. Now, when they said that, I was a bit shocked, and I thought maybe they'd misspoke. They definitely seemed nervous, the witnesses, and they were a bit under pressure, as you said. They haven't been subject to this much around the world. They kind of got off scot-free. So I thought maybe he made a mistake, but other senators, Matt O'Sullivan, a colleague of ours, and Senator Hanson, I think as well, pursued them on the matter, and they repeated it. They repeated it multiple times that they believe
he said it on backed up. He said, quote, I believe firmly that nobody was forced to have a vaccine.
Now, look, this, I suppose to some degree this debate then becomes semantic. What does the word forced mean? And the position of Pfizer must be that when you're given a choice between your job and getting the jab, that's not forced. That's a choice. Apparently, that's a choice. You can choose to feed your children, choose to pay your mortgage, or choose to get the jab. That's a ridiculous and ludicrous definition of the word forced. Obviously, people were forced. They were certainly under duress to get this vaccine, and it was a great injustice. As I said at the start, people are still suffering this. So the best thing you could do to help us is just to get those stories out there. Because, I mean, the vast majority of the Australian people do not support mandates now. There was a time, perhaps, when there was all this fear porn from the media.
Well, even then,
I'd say. It was, look, it was a crazy time. But now, definitely, people do not support these mandates. They're still causing shortages in our hospital system, exacerbation of essential services. These need to end. And we're doing our best here, a few senators, but people can help too by sharing this message, sharing this podcast, sharing people's stories. The more that happens, the quicker this will end. I should say too, one thing we didn't cover is at the start of this inquiry, we also subpoenaed a bunch of companies like Coles and the retail group. They do Super Cheap Auto and a few others. They still had mandates on at the time. And surprise, surprise, not long after they were subpoenaed, they dropped their mandates. Now, we didn't pursue them to get them forward for evidence because they dropped their mandate. So great, let's move on to bigger fish. But and I don't know if our legislation, our committee helped, but I definitely think it probably helped bring it forward and accelerate it. That they didn't really want to come to the Senate and justify these things, so they just dropped them. And
I think it does highlight the point that properly used, this system works, and you've done a great job, and so have you. But just as we finish up, I just question to both of you. And we don't like hypotheticals, but there's a lot of people out there that say to me all the time, but when do we see some results? When do we see this pushed back? When do we see the truth coming out? This obviously has done a great job in getting a lot of that stuff out, but where does it go from here? Like what do we see with the bill? We just had today United Australia Party Ralph Babbitt's motion to get, that is ours, that is red, to get up. We may have to truncate this.
Well, I'll be really quick. Where we go now is we'll try and get this bill debated and voted on in the Senate. We'll do our best for that, so we'll push for that. But as you say, there are other committee processes. Well, we'll just keep pursuing them. I don't think this will be the last time Pfizer and Moderna come before the Australian Senate, so we'll be pushing for that.
That's good. Jared, quickly.
Mate, we've got to build numbers. We're not, Labor and the Greens will never admit they got this wrong.
Right.
And the only way to change this is actually, I know some of you guys get emotional about this, but don't be rational, be strong. You've got to join the party. We've got to kick out the people that don't stand up for our values, and we've got to get the numbers, because there's one thing I've learnt in politics is morality and logic count for nothing. It's all about numbers. So get out there. I mean, we're trying to build numbers in our own states. I got rolled by people that have a problem with me for speaking out. That's what we want in the party. We want more people to come back in and help get people like myself and others. So we can do the right thing in Parliament and actually hold these guys.
We're still fighting for you, Jared.
We've got to get the bat signals on. Good stuff. Very, all right, well done. Thanks, guys.
Cheers, mate.